All right, so now we're at the planning stages of our design. And as you can see here, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be the first design that we're going to be addressing. Now, one of the things I want to bring up first and foremost is the idea of how our designs are going to react inside of our browser windows. In other words, the very first type of design that I'm going to be showing you how to create, not only in Photoshop, but then how to assemble inside of Dreamweaver, is this one here, which I would refer to as a fixed pixel based design. And the reason we're addressing a fixed pixel based design first is because it's probably the easiest style of design that we can build inside of our websites. So, what a fixed pixel based design will do is once it's inside of a browser window, if I move that browser window, if I resize that browser window, if I full screen that browser window, the elements inside of the browser, the design that we're creating right here, is going to be fixed. In other words, it's fixed to a specific size and it's never going to move. It's always going to be sort of set in that sort of scenario. The other kind of website that we will also be addressing in our series here is something called a liquid-based design. And liquid-based designs are much more malleable. They stretch out, they move around. Some of the text will be resized when we sort of resize our browser window. The text will wrap and get bigger or smaller. There's advantages and disadvantages to both of these. The advantages to a fixed pixel-based design is, number one, quite simply, it's a lot easier to sort of build inside of your web scenario. And the other advantage is that you always have a sort of understanding of how big your text is going to look, how big the columns of your text are going to look. So you don't end up with, if somebody has like some ridiculously large screen, you don't end up with 75 words on one line before a new paragraph or line in that paragraph begins. A liquid-based design, on the other hand, also has its advantages. One of the things that we want to avoid is horizontal scrolling on our designs. Well, if somebody has a screen resolution that's smaller than this particular design, one of the things that you'll encounter if you're working with a fixed pixel is that in order to see the entire design, you might have a horizontal scroll bar. That's generally something you want to avoid. So, before we move forward with our planning of how this is going to be laid out and what it's going to do, one of the things that you have to sort of keep in mind is the simple fact that if we are addressing a fixed pixel based design, we have to know what the average end user is going to be looking at in terms of their screen resolution and how it is going to react with our particular design. So, a couple of things about that. Where do we get this screen information? Where do we get this information about resolution and how things work in that case? Well, one of the best places you could go is the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. There are a bunch of people out of MIT that are working to set the web standards. It's led by a guy by the name of Tim Berners-Lee. Incidentally, he actually invented HTML in the very early 90s. And he and his team are responsible for things like web standards, the CSS revolution, all of these different things which make developing web pages so much better than it was, say, 10 years ago or something along those lines. So that's one spot that you can go. There's another place that you can go called Net Market Share, as you can see here. And what I'm showing you in the Net Market Share website is this. The vast majority of people who are looking at your websites have a screen resolution of minimum 1024 by 768 or higher. That's the vast majority of people. So higher than 1024 by 768 probably accounts for like 94-95% of your audience. Anything smaller than that is a very small portion of your audience. 800 by 600 used to be popular, but as technology improves and as screens get better and graphic cards get better, more and more people are able to support a higher screen resolution on their particular computers. So when we are addressing a fixed pixel based website and deciding upon our environment and how we're going to sort of plan for this 1024 by 768 environment, we have to keep those statistics in mind. So even though 20% and higher are on 1024 by 768, what we're saying here is that if we address that base of 1024 by 768, that will give us something that's going to work on the vast majority of people's browsers. So if a person has a browser size that's larger than 1024, no problem. You're just going to have some extra space on the left and right hand side of your website. If somebody is at 1024, that's great too, because that's exactly how we're optimizing our Photoshop layout to work inside of their browsers. So you'll only have less than 1% of the population that will actually encounter a horizontal scroll bar when looking at your website in a full screened scenario. So that's actually pretty good statistics for us, and because of that, we're going to address our layout and plan for our layout to be well within the 1024 environment. Now, if you'll notice when you say File New inside of Photoshop, one of the things that you can address is that there are preset sizes. There are preset sizes here for the print industry, US paper, international paper, stuff like that. But there are also web and mobile devices, film and video, stuff like that. Well, the web presets are all set to different screen resolutions, and that's wonderful. So you might think, hey, Santo just told me 1024 by 768 is the way to go, so that's what I'm going to choose. But let's hold on before we do that. I want to also address something else to you. If I were to just switch over to Firefox here for a second, and we're looking at this full screen, when we say that the screen resolution is actually 1024 by 768, what I actually mean there is the very top of my screen down to the very bottom of my screen, as you can see here. But with this browser being full size, as you very well can see, notice that there's a lot of information here, or rather a lot of real estate that's being taken up by a number of things. Number one, the operating system. I'm working on a Mac. You might be working on a PC, but that operating system is going to take up a small portion of your screen. But look at this, the browser, and here I'm working inside of Firefox. The browser is taking up a good portion of real estate on my screen as well. Not only here at the top, but there's some scrollable areas down here on the side. There's also down here at the bottom a status bar that's taking up some of my screen. So all my website really has to contend with is this area in the middle right here. That area does not make up 1024. 1024, as I said, is the top of your computer screen down to the bottom of your computer screen, or at least what my computer screen happens to be set to here. And the vast majority of people are, as we mentioned, following at least this screen or a higher screen resolution. So in order to make your website work really well, if I was to create a layout of 1024 by 768, then we would see that if my browser was set to full screen, there would still be a lot of real estate that's taken up by the browser itself, probably giving me a horizontal scroll bar, which I don't really want. Now, a vertical scroll bar is not really the end of the world. A lot of people have come to expect that, but I want to address that in just a second. If you want to play it safe, the best way to work within this environment is to choose a width and a height of 955 by 600. Now, let's also address that issue. There's going to be some math that we're going to have to do. Sorry if you don't like math, but you do have to spend some time preparing, especially in a fixed pixel-based design, a little bit of how your layout is going to work inside the browser, so there's a little math involved. If you want to have the easiest way of working with that, we can round off our 955 to a nice even 900. That'll be easy for us to sort of divide into different sections and work out mathematically. The height of 600, on the other hand, is something that also contends with all of that extra real estate that's taken up by the browser, as we mentioned earlier. So, what does this mean for us? Well, I mentioned that height of 600 is also important for a number of different reasons. Number one, as I mentioned, vertical scroll bars are not really unusual in the web world, and everybody comes to expect them to a certain degree. However, one important thing about this height of 600 is in the design field, we often refer to these areas as above the fold or below the fold. Well, in print, it's easy to think about this. Think about like a newspaper and how a newspaper is folded in half, usually when you pick it up. Well, everything above the fold, or at the top of the newspaper, is generally seen as the most important information. It's also the most highly visible information. That's where you'll have to pay the most for advertising, and there's a reason behind that, because it's got the most visibility. Same thing can be applied to the principle on a web-based environment. Everything above a height of 600 is referred to as above the fold. Because of this, we can recognize that the vast majority of people are going to be looking at that area more so than anything below the fold. Now, that doesn't mean any person is not going to look below the fold. Of course, the information's there. It's always going to be there. However, the most important elements of your website should always be above the height of 600, or rather above the fold. It's really important to sort of address this because it's the highest area of visibility. Most people are going to look at that area before moving on to another website. Not everybody's necessarily going to read everything below that area. Most will, but the attention span of most people will sort of peter off with anything below the height of 600. So address that issue as well, and that's something that's important here too. So not only is that 600 sort of addressing the extra real estate that's inside of the browser that we can't use for our design, but it also addresses some important information in terms of visibility from your audience. Also, remember something else. SEO, search engine optimization, tells us that search engine spiders, as they crawl the web and as they crawl down different websites, will generally only have a finite amount of information that they can ingest. And usually what is happening is they ingest the information that is above the fold. Now, that's not to say that they won't grab anything that's below the height of 600. It's possible, but the higher your height value is, the less information that search engine spiders will actually attract. So if you have something that's ridiculously high and a lot of scrolling on your website, that might actually affect your SEO adversely. So it's something that you also should be aware of, not only for the attention span of your audience, but also for search engine optimization. So what I've done here is in Photoshop chosen a height and width of 900 by 600, and that's what we're going to be starting with. At this point now, we're also going to have to address a couple of other things. In other words, where we're going to set up our rulers and guides, and also a little bit of information about color schemes and how we can work with color not only inside of Photoshop but in any application that you want to be working with, even if it's just straightforward HTML. So we'll discuss a little bit more about color in just a second.